So I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about the work that I've been doing at Monash University and also with the digital therapeutics company TALI Health. And my work focuses on game-based training in childhood. As I'm sure you are all aware, the use of technology in gaming has increased dramatically over the past decade and has become a part of everyday life for people across all ages. Advances in technology have led to an explosion in both the diversity and accessibility of information, which has had many positive effects on the way we live our lives. However, we know that there are also consequences in the way that we interact with each other, with the environment, and ourselves. Technology has been linked to social isolation, poor sleep habits, and increased stress. In children, there have also been concerns that technology reduces children's attention spans, and also the use of search engines reduces their ability to store information. Despite these concerns, the use of technology continues to grow, and one area that has seen significant growth is that of game-based cognitive training programs. So these programs are designed to improve or enhance aspects of cognition, and that's what I'm going to focus on in the talk today. So cognitive training is now the most represented health topic within the field of serious games, followed by educational games. And although the cognitive training industry has faced some backlash in the past year, it's important to note that not all training programs are designed the same, and that the latest research has highlighted some positive impacts, particularly in childhood populations. So when we think about evaluating whether these game-based training programs can help support childhood development, the first thing that we need to understand is how these programs work. So what are the mechanisms that underlie cognitive training programs? And then also thinking about applying a theoretical framework that helps to ensure that we are designing, evaluating, and implementing them in the best way possible. So game-based training programs typically involve repeated and intensive practice on specific exercises which aim to strengthen cognitive processes at the brain level. It is hoped that these gains will not only be seen within the skill that you're specifically training, but also skills that are associated with that training domain. Often when I talk about cognitive training, I try and describe it in a similar way that we think about physical training. So if we wanted to improve our cardiovascular system, we might go for runs twice a week. We're likely to see improvements in our running ability, but we're also likely to see improvements in other skills or exercises that also use that cardiovascular system, so things like swimming or basketball. And cognitive training works in a similar way. So we improve one particular cognitive skill, and we hope that the skills that are associated with that cognitive skill are also improved through training. Cognitive training is built on the principles of neuroplasticity. So when we think about neuroplasticity, that's really the brain's ability to change chemically, physically, in response to internal demands and also our environment. So there's now a wealth of research that confirms that the neuroplastic changes induced in our brain are specific to our environments. So every time we learn something new, we develop new connections, and every time we practice something we already know, we're strengthening those connections. And although plasticity is present in the adult brain, neuroplasticity is greatest early in development when the brain is still undergoing significant changes. So after this period of rapid proliferation, connections are then reduced through a process of pruning so that brain circuits become more efficient. Although the brain continues to change until early adulthood, it is early experiences in the first 6 to 8 years of life that really dictate whether we're going to have a sturdy or a fragile foundation for subsequent cognitive development, behavioral regulation, and learning. So despite this, the majority of cognitive training programs are developed for adult populations. And those that have been developed for child populations typically focus on children over the age of 8 years. So my research really focuses on looking at cognitive training programs and their application in children under the age of 8, as this is where I believe there's potentially the greatest ability to promote changes at the brain level. So if we've decided that we are going to target early childhood, the next question is really what cognitive domains or what skills should we be training? So current game-based training programs predominantly focus on improving something called working memory. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with working memory, but it's essentially your ability to remember information, then manipulate that information prior to recall. So I'm going to just show you an example of a working memory task, and I want you to try and remember the numbers that appear on the screen. So I don't know if you want to collectively try and remember those in order and say them out loud. Yeah, go for it. Yep, perfect. So that is a type of short-term memory. If we're thinking of working memory, what I want you to do is remember that sequence of numbers backwards.
5, 6.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's a more complex aspect of memory. So you can see there's a bit more cognitive functions that are required in order to complete working memory tasks. So when we think of working memory training programs, the research has shown that there has been some improvements in working memory tasks as a result of using working memory training programs. But these findings have not been consistent across studies. And there's also been less transfer to other skills via working memory training programs. It's been suggested that for young children, training complex skills such as working memory is like putting the cart before the horse. So what we really want to focus on in these training programs is training foundation skills that are emerging early in development and that are integral to supporting more complex cognitive development. So the most obvious of these skills is attention. So attention helps us to concentrate on a task, to switch our attention from one task to the next, and also inhibit impulsive responding. Attention has been shown to be integral for a number of things, so in terms of cognitive development, our ability to learn within the classroom, maintaining and forming social relationships, and also as a key predictor in supporting mental health throughout our lifespan. Particularly in terms of learning, which is obviously very relevant for childhood populations, attention has been shown to be a significant predictor of academic outcomes. So there was a longitudinal study that showed that inattention at the age of 4, so really slight inattentive behaviours, not clinical inattention, was a significant predictor for academic and vocational outcomes at the age of 25. So a really strong predictor of long-term outcomes. Attention difficulties is also the most commonly reported childhood concern for parents, and estimates indicate that approximately 7.2% of children globally experience clinical attention difficulties, which result in a diagnosis of ADHD. However, attention difficulties are also common in children without ADHD. By the age of 4, as many as 40% of otherwise typically developing children have sufficient problems with attention to be a concern to both parents and teachers. Oh, keep on going the wrong way. In the case of children with developmental disorders such as autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, or non-specific intellectual disability, attention difficulties are incredibly common. And they also exacerbate what is already a compromised cognitive system. So this in turn has a detrimental impact on the child's ability to interact with others and the world around them, and increases their already heightened risk of emotional and behavioural problems. Despite the enormity of this problem, interventions for attention difficulties are relatively sparse. For children over the age of 7, the most common intervention is psychostimulant medication, such as Ritalin, and they're designed to curb the hyperactive and inattentive behaviours by increasing the levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine. In the US, around 3.5 million children are being treated for ADHD with medication. And although the short-term effects of this type of medication are well documented, so we see reductions in those inattentive and hyperactive behaviours, less is known about the long-term impacts, and particularly around the impacts that these psychostimulant medications have on the developing brain. For some children, such as those who are very young or who have developmental disorders, the risks and side effects of using this type of medication are simply too great. And this is where game-based training can offer a potential alternative in terms of improving attention difficulties via non-pharmacological means. So with my team at Monash University and game developers Taurus Games over in Australia, we have developed the first game-based training program that specifically targets core attention skills in young children with developmental disorders. So TALI Train is designed as a 5-week clinical intervention. It's registered as a Class 1 medical device with the TGA, which is the equivalent of the FDA, and it's also reimbursable under the National Disabilities Insurance Scheme. Since early intervention is the key to better outcomes, TALI Train has been designed for children as young as 3, going up to the age of 8. The program is accessed via a touchscreen tablet, making it available to users across a wide range of geographical locations. Children are advised to complete the training program 5 times a week, equating to 25 sessions in total over a 5-week training period. Compliance is one of the most crucial factors for obtaining treatment outcomes or improvements after training, and this is often an issue when implementing interventions in very young children and those with developmental disorders. TALI Train overcomes this by using some of the gamified features that people have discussed today, so things such as an interactive character, scheduled verbal and visual reinforcements, immediate feedback, and engaging storylines to ensure that we're increasing engagement and, as a result, improving compliance. TALI Train also has inbuilt analytics, and this allows the program to be adaptively adjusted in real time to the child's ability to ensure that they're working at their optimal level. So if we think back to the physical exercise example, this is really like having a personal trainer. So we're always ensuring that the child is working to a level that is optimal to them, but not too challenging. So TALI Train consists of 4 training exercises based on well-established paradigms that target underlying attention capacities. Each exercise lasts 4 minutes, and additional themes are added halfway through training to increase interest. So I'll just talk through some of the exercises now. And they're all targeting 3 of the core aspects of attention. So the first task is looking at selective attention. And this is your ability to notice or pick out relevant information within the environment whilst filtering out distracting information. So in this exercise, children have to locate medium orange-sized fish amongst a series of distractors that differ in shape, colour, size, and pattern. And as the difficulty increases, we incorporate more distractors and distractors that are harder to distinguish from the targets. The second of the exercises is looking at sustained attention. So that's really what we think about when we think of concentration, or when we talk about our attention span. That's really sustained attention. So children have to respond to the treasure chest only when it stops moving. The difficulty increases by adding more chests that the child has to monitor, and increasing the time between when the chest stops. So children have to maintain their attention for longer. These are some of the really early levels, so it becomes more and more complex like this as they move through. This is one of the tasks that looks at attentional control. So this is really focusing on response inhibition. So this is our ability to stop ourselves from behaving impulsively. This is a skill that young children often find quite difficult. In this exercise, children have to make a response as quickly as they can when they see an elephant, and to withhold making a response when they see any other animal. The task becomes quicker as children move through the levels. This is another attentional control task. So we have 2 tasks that focus on attentional control, as that's a more complex aspect of attention. So this is focusing really on a child's ability to filter out irrelevant or conflicting information. Children are required to assess the way Elvis the elephant is facing, and to then make a response either left or right. Sometimes Elvis will be on his own, sometimes he will be with some friends, and the elephants on either side will either be facing in the same direction, so providing consistent information, or facing in the opposite direction, so providing conflict to the child in which they have to resolve. In the harder levels, we include colour elephants, so they have to make a choice based on colour. And then in the harder ones, we include both colour and direction. So in order to assess whether game-based training programs are supporting childhood development, we must first evaluate past published studies that have assessed the efficacy of these programs. This is a little bit challenging at the moment, because given the relative recent emergence of this type of intervention, there has been limited control over what constitutes a good evaluation. And as such, the current literature is inconclusive as to whether these interventions are effective. And one of the main difficulties in evaluating this field is that the methodology of each study differs widely. A review published in 2016 outlines several core guidelines that are required to assess whether cognitive training is effective. First, a gold standard design should be followed, and this constitutes a double-blind randomized control trial. So this design ensures that neither the researcher or the participant is aware of the condition that they are assigned to, and therefore reduces bias in perceived training effects. In addition, it also allows indirect intervention effects to be controlled for. So there's evidence that shows that simply adhering to a training schedule can promote improvements. If a child believes that they're taking part in an intervention, they'll also see improvements. And also if you're collecting parent rating scales, there's obviously the bias there that parents of children who are receiving an intervention will believe that it is being beneficial. Second, longitudinal studies are required to evaluate the long-term effects of this type of intervention. Thirdly, appropriate control groups are required. So there's a significant amount of training studies that have been published that either don't have a control group or only include a passive control group, which therefore makes it difficult to attribute training effects to the actual training program that you're looking to evaluate. And finally, one of the most important things is to use independent outcome measures. So lots of training studies report improvements within the program itself or within the games themselves, but they're not actually assessing whether there's been transfer to other skills. So if we're looking to see improvements in something like attention, we want to evaluate on standardized assessment measures of attention, rather than just looking at whether a child has improved in the game itself, because really that's related more to practice effects. I mean, if any of us were to do something every day for 5 weeks, we're likely to see improvements on that specific task, but that doesn't mean that we're actually improving that cognitive skill. So in terms of TALI Train, we have evaluated it in line with those guidelines. We've conducted 2 double-blind randomized control trials, both in children who have developmental disorders, and then we've recently conducted a trial that looks at whether it's effective in typically developing children. So in children with developmental disorders, we saw that after using the program for 5 weeks, children had a significantly greater improvement in their selective attention abilities than children who were using a control program. We also saw that these improvements were maintained up to 3 months after training had ceased, and also that we saw improvements in numeracy skills as well, so getting that transfer onto untrained domains, which was very exciting and something that hasn't been shown much in the literature. When we assessed the program in typically developing children, we saw that those who used TALI Train had significantly greater improvements in inattentive and hyperactive behaviours in the classroom immediately after training. So all of the improvements that we've seen are that these improvements are significantly greater than children who used an active control group, a control program. So they were using their program for the same duration of time, but TALI Train promoted these greater benefits. All of these studies have been published in peer-reviewed journals. So in terms of assessing the benefits and shortfalls above, I guess, the scientific evidence base, given that that's still being built up, there are a number of benefits that game-based training presents in terms of supporting childhood development. So firstly, games can increase engagement. As lots of people have spoken about today, treatment doesn't need to be boring. It can be challenging and it can be fun and engaging. And gamifying this type of therapeutic, we've seen really positive feedback from children and parents and teachers as well. Also, playing games can also signal the release of dopamine. And as I mentioned, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's released through psychostimulant medication. And that can also be released through using game-based technology. So there's also, therefore, the ability to reduce behavioural difficulties seen in children who are experiencing attention difficulties. Dopamine is also associated with learning and improving learning. So there's possibility that that release of dopamine through game-based learning can also see an improvement in a child's ability to remember information. One of the biggest benefits is that it is possible to obtain immediate feedback, and by using information about a child's performance, we're then able to tailor the experience with the intervention. And that's something that more pharmacological-based interventions lack is that it's kind of this one-size-fits-all approach. So if we can use the child's individual data and performance to tailor that intervention to that specific child, then that's really beneficial. This type of platform is also really beneficial in that it can be used in young children because it reduces the load or requirements of motor or verbal skills. So our program has very minimal verbal components so that children can easily understand the instructions, and that's not a limiting factor to their engagement with the program. In terms of shortfalls, and there are some, one of the biggest difficulty of training is that gains made on the program itself are difficult to translate into real-world situations. But I believe that as gaming environments become richer, this weakness should be easier to overcome. Many parents also have concerns over screen time, and this is something that we were mindful of when we were developing TALI Train. So the program times out after 20 minutes and children can't access the program again until the next day. And although there has been some evidence to show that intensive screen time can be detrimental, short periods of screen time has also been shown to be positive for children's education and supporting their development. There's also been some concern about creating situations in which children are receiving immediate support and becoming accustomed to this gamified situation, that they will be less motivated by non-game-based activities. However, there's currently not enough evidence to assess whether that is in fact the case and whether that is detrimental to children. We know that children respond to novelty, so it's likely that a combination of both game-based technology and more traditional measures of improving or supporting childhood development is likely to be the most effective. Just want to briefly touch on using game-based platforms beyond training. And one of the areas in which we can do that is assessment. So attention difficulties are commonly diagnosed through lengthy assessments, and diagnosis is primarily based on behavioural rating scales. Although difficulties in attention appear between the ages of 3 to 6, often children don't get diagnosed with ADHD or any other attention difficulty until they're 7 or 8 years of age. And by this time, attention deficits have already had a detrimental impact on that child's functioning, and they've already missed out on several years of early intervention. So something that we're also developing through Monash University and with TALI Health is a scalable tool for screening childhood inattention between the ages of 3 to 6. And again, this is going to be game-based, so we have 6 exercises that aim to modernise existing assessment measures. We started on this project in January, so it's still in the very early stages, but we were lucky enough to receive a government grant to help support the development of this program. So in summary, early detection and intervention is key to supporting childhood development, and throughout development, children are encouraged to learn through play, and game-based programs offer a modern approach to this. Traditional interventions are often not viable for young children or children with developmental disorders. But children with developmental disorders, such as those with autism, show a preference for using technology in both leisure and learning activities. These programs therefore facilitate these children accessing an intervention. I think it's really important though to remember that game-based training is unlikely to be a permanent fix, in the same way that we expect other interventions such as Ritalin to not provide a cure. If we see a child who stops taking Ritalin, we expect there to be some rebound in their inattentive and hyperactive symptoms, and the same is likely to be the case with cognitive training. The impact that it has may diminish over time, but really what we need is greater research to understand the long-term effects of cognitive training, and also further understand the mechanisms underlying cognitive training. And that'll help us hone in on who this type of intervention works best for and why.